The Stranger by Albert Camus. What I'm going to do here is discuss the book. I'm not going to talk about the history of the book or anything like that. I'm just going to go right into the book. The first paragraph of this book tells you everything you need to know about Meursault, the main character. He says this: "Mother died today, or maybe yesterday. I can't be sure. The telegram from the home says, 'Your mother passed away. Funeral tomorrow. Deep sympathy.' Which leaves the matter doubtful. It could have been yesterday." He's like an empty vessel. He's someone without emotion or personality. I mean, his personality is like that of a cardboard box. I don't think that he didn't really care. It's just that he didn't know how to care. When he asked for 2 days off work to go to his mother's funeral, he told his employer, "Sorry, sir, but it's not my fault, you know." This kind of strange behavior is prominent throughout the book. Meursault went to the mortuary at the Home for Aged Persons at Marengo. He didn't bother to see his mother's body when the doorkeeper asked to unscrew the lid. And when the man was getting ready to unscrew the coffin, Meursault told him not to bother. Now, this is his mother, yet he's indifferent to her. He doesn't have an interest in seeing her one last time before she is buried. He was really more concerned with his own bodily sensations. He even smoked and dozed off. He also mentions that if his mother hadn't died, he would have been able to take a nice walk in the country, but her death kind of inconvenienced him. The next day, he decided to go to the swimming pool. While there, he got acquainted with Marie Cardone. She was a typist at his office. They immediately started a love affair. First, they saw a comedy and then went back to his place to make love. Now, you have to understand, this is the day after his mother's funeral. He's not mourning. In fact, he's moved on rather quickly. He even said, "Really, nothing in my life had changed." On Monday, he's back in his office. His employer asked how old Meursault's mother was. He wasn't sure. He said she was about 60, but still, he didn't know. One day when he decided to leave his apartment, he saw his neighbor Salamano in the hallway. Salamano had an old dog, a spaniel. Meursault described the dog as an ugly brute, afflicted with mange, and had lost all of its hair, and its body was covered in brown scabs. He said Salamano and his dog looked alike. Salamano also abused his dog. Again, Meursault was indifferent. He didn't really bother to get involved in Salamano's business. He didn't stand up for the dog. He didn't question Salamano's behavior. He just went his own way. He also runs into Raymond, a friend of his who happens to be a pimp, even though he says he's a warehouseman. Raymond also lives on Meursault's floor. They have some black pudding and wine together in Raymond's apartment. It's here that Raymond tells Meursault about a fight he was in. The man was the brother of Raymond's girlfriend. Raymond beat up the man's sister for cheating on him and squandering his money. The brother was looking for revenge. You could say that this storyline is the downfall of Meursault, and that will come later. Raymond asks Meursault to write the girl a letter for him to lure her back in. The plan, as Raymond put it, was to get the girl to come back. He'd sleep with her, then spit in her face and throw her out of the room. Meursault agreed that it wasn't a bad plan and that it would punish the girl. Again, Meursault is indifferent. He doesn't empathize with the girl. He doesn't try to tell Raymond that maybe this is wrong, like morally. Nor does he consider what he's doing to be illegal. So Meursault wrote the letter for Raymond. And the next day, Meursault went to the beach with Marie. Then they went back to his place for more sex. And when she asked him if he loved her, he said, "That sort of question had no meaning, really. But I supposed I didn't." Meursault didn't have any concept of love or what it entailed. He was emotionless. He's detached from the world. He doesn't know what love is. And he doesn't really even know what hate is. Meursault and Marie heard a woman's voice from Raymond's apartment and then yelling. Raymond was beating the girl. This was the same woman Meursault wrote the letter for Raymond to lure her back to his place. Raymond then threw her down the stairs, and there was a crowd around her at the landing. Well, this is the bottom of the stairs, the landing is. Marie told Meursault to call the cops, but he said he didn't like policemen. See, Meursault is amoral. He wasn't moral or immoral. It's just that something was missing. I mean, to say that he didn't like cops when a woman was beaten says a lot about him. When everyone left, Raymond visited Meursault. He asked Meursault to be a false witness for him, to tell the police that Raymond was the victim, not her. Meursault agrees to this. Meursault's reasoning was that he had no reason not to help Raymond. Meanwhile, Salamano's dog ran off. He was upset and clearly distraught. Meursault told him that the pound held dogs for 3 days, waiting for their owners to call them. After that, they disposed of the dogs as they saw fit. Meursault was absolutely honest. It didn't matter if someone was hurt by it or irritated. He had no reason to lie. And this absolute honesty is kind of odd because most people are not like that. Most people would tell Salamano, "Oh, you'll find your dog. Something will happen. Somebody will bring your dog to you." Or, any kind of excuse like that. But Meursault isn't like that. He is absolutely honest. While at work, Meursault's boss asked him if he'd like to go to Paris to work. But Meursault turned him down. His boss said he shilly-shallied and lacked ambition. Meursault said he had no reason to change his life and that ambition was futile. This is another example of Meursault acting on his own accord and not doing what was expected of him by society. He had no reason to climb the ladder because in his eyes, life was meaningless. It didn't matter if you were successful, poor, or even homeless. None of that mattered. That evening, Marie stopped by Meursault's apartment. She asked if he would marry her. He said he didn't mind. If she was keen on it, he'd marry her. Then she asked again if he loved her, and he said that her question meant nothing or next to nothing, and supposed that he didn't love her. She said, "If that's how you feel, why marry me?" And he explained that it had no importance really, but if it would give her pleasure, they would get married right away. She said marriage was a serious matter. Then she said, "Suppose another girl had asked you to marry her. I mean, a girl you liked in the same way as you like me. Would you have said yes to her as well? His reply was, naturally. He told her he'd get married anytime they like. She called him a queer fellow. When he asked if she wanted to join him for dinner, she said she had other plans. She said, "Don't you want to know what I'm doing this evening?" He did wonder, but hadn't thought of asking her. Mersault's interaction with Marie shows how he basically goes through the motions of life. He's sleepwalking through the world with no regard for the feelings of others. Because in his view, nothing in life matters. We live, we die, that's how he feels. And to marry somebody without even being in love with them, or marrying somebody just because they want to get married, is one of those sleepwalking through life scenarios I just mentioned. On Saturday night, Mersault and Raymond visited the police station, and Mersault gave a false witness to the police. He said that it was a woman's fault, so they let Raymond off with a warning. Mersault doesn't see the larger picture or place himself in the shoes of others. He simply reacts. He helped Raymond beat the charge of domestic violence because, in his view, it was the right thing to do. It didn't matter that Raymond beat a woman, or for whatever reason he beat the woman. None of that mattered to Mersault. On Sunday morning, Marie, Mersault, and Raymond went to Raymond's friend's place. Along the way, a small group of Arabs were following them on the bus. One was the brother of the woman Raymond beat up. The Arabs didn't follow them to the place, but they were in the vicinity. The place was outside Algiers. Raymond's friend Mason owned a small wooden bungalow at the near end of the beach. It rested against the cliffside. As soon as they got there, Marie, Mason, and Mersault went swimming. It was around this time that the sun started to affect Mersault. It made him sleepy. Yet, strangely, during this time, he thought of marrying Marie. But since the weather has an effect on Mersault's thoughts, it was probably the sun doing this to him. Mersault is very much affected by the weather. After lunch, Raymond, Mason, and Mersault went for a stroll on the beach. As they walked down the beach, they got into a fight with two of the Arabs that followed them there. The conflict escalated from a fistfight to Raymond's arm and mouth being cut. And during this time, Mersault was more concerned with how the sand felt on his feet and how the sun glistened off the water and how the heat was welling up from the rocks. He said, "I wasn't thinking of anything, as all that sunlight beating down on my bare head made me feel half asleep." Now think about that. They're in the middle of a major conflict, and all Mersault can think about is how the sand fell on his feet. Mason and Mersault helped Raymond back to the bungalow. When Marie saw the wound, she went pale, and Mason's wife was in tears. So Mason and Raymond went to a doctor that spent Sundays there. While they were at the doctor's, Mersault stayed behind at the bungalow. He was supposed to explain the matter to the women, but he decided to smoke and look at the sea instead. When the men got back, Raymond wanted to take a walk on the beach. He got angry when Mason and Mersault wanted to come along, so Mason stayed behind while Mersault followed in spite of Raymond's insistence that he not follow. Again, Mersault is preoccupied with the sun and the heat. He says, "It was like a furnace outside, with the sunlight splintering into flakes of fire on the sand and sea." I think this preoccupation with weather conditions is how Mersault turns off his thoughts. Instead of thinking of more important matters, he chooses to focus on things that he has no control over, like how bright the sun is or how hot the sand is beneath his feet. At the end of the beach, they came to a small stream. The two Arabs were there lying on the sand. Raymond had his revolver with him and asked Mersol, "Shall I plug him one?" Mersol said, "You take the fellow on the right and give me your revolver. If the other one starts to make trouble or gets out his knife, I'll shoot him." Mersol thought to himself, and just then it crossed my mind that one might fire or not fire, and it would come to absolutely the same thing. Then all of a sudden the Arabs were gone. I think Mersol expresses nihilistic tendencies throughout this book, but it seems clear when he says one might fire or not fire, it could come to the same thing. In other words, if he kills a man or doesn't kill a man, either way it doesn't matter. This is why I believe Mersol is indeed a nihilist. His views are baseless. He believes in nothing. No laws, no morals, no God. He has no loyalties to society and has the impulse to destroy when given the chance. So Mersol and Raymond walked back to the bungalow. When they reached the bungalow, Raymond promptly went up the wooden steps, but Mersol stayed at the bottom. He said that the heat was so great that it was just as bad staying where he was under the flood of blinding light falling from the sky. Again, Mersol lives in the moment. He doesn't consider going up to the bungalow because what matters is the moment, right then and there, as he's standing in that very spot. This is because Mersol is the living embodiment of absurdity. Then he went back to the beach, with Raymond's gun, of course. It was during this time that Mersol became hyper aware of the heat, the sun, and how it affected his senses. He said, "There was the same red glare as far as I could reach, and small waves were lapping the hot sand in little flurried gasps. As I slowly walked towards the boulders at the end of the beach, I could feel my temples swelling under the impact of the light. It pressed itself on me, trying to check my progress, and each time I felt a hot blast strike my forehead. I gritted my teeth. I clenched my fists in my trouser pockets and keyed up every nerve to fend off the sun and the dark befuddlement it was pouring into me." He goes to a small lump of rock to get out of the sun. That's when he saw the Arab that stabbed Raymond. The Arab raised his knife but made no effort to go after Mersol. All Mersol had to do at this point was walk away. There was still some distance between the two. Mersol said, "I waited. The sun was beginning to scorch my cheeks. Beads of sweat were gathering in my eyebrows. It was just the same sort of heat at my mother's funeral, and I had the same disagreeable sensations, especially in my forehead, where all the veins seemed to be bursting through the skin. I couldn't stand it any longer, and took another step forward. I knew it was a fool thing to do. I wouldn't get out of the sun by moving on a yard or so. And then the Arab drew his knife and held it toward me athwart the sunlight. A shaft of light shot upward from the steel, and it felt as if a long, thin blade transfixed my forehead. At the same moment, all the sweat that had accumulated in my eyebrows splashed down on my eyelids, covering them with a warm film of moisture. Beneath a veil of brine and tears, my eyes were blinded. I was conscious only of the symbols of the sun clashing on my skull, and less distinctly of the keen blade of light flashing up from the knife, scarring my eyelashes and gouging into my eyeballs. Then everything began to reel before my eyes. A fiery gust came from the sea, while the sky cracked in two from end to end, and a great sheet of flame poured down through the rift. Every nerve in my body was a steel spring, and my grip closed on the revolver. The trigger gave, and the smooth underbelly of the butt jogged my palm. And so, with that crisp, whip-crack sound, it all began. I shook off my sweat and the clinging veil of light. I knew I'd shattered the balance of the day, but I fired 4 shots into the inert body, and each successive shot was another loud, fateful rap at the door of my undoing. This passage comes at the midpoint of the novel. It's the biggest and most important place in the book. It's interesting how Meursault blames the heat and the reactions he has to it. And he also said the trigger gave, instead of saying that he pulled the trigger. When Meursault was being questioned, the magistrate asked if he needed a lawyer, but Meursault declined. But he was appointed one anyway. The lawyer mentioned that he was investigating Meursault's life and found that he showed great callousness at his mother's funeral. Meursault said he lost the habit of noting his feelings, and that all normal people had more or less desired the death of those they loved at some time or another. He also confessed that his physical condition at any given moment often influenced his feelings. Meursault considered this to be ordinary, this being detached, and it's different from what normal people experience or feel. And also, Meursault reveals everything. Like I said before, he tells the truth absolutely. He doesn't lie. And the worst thing that he could do was to say that normal people wish the death of a loved one. This certainly didn't help his case. And also, I'm not sure if normal people wish the death of a loved one anyway. Meursault does, but he doesn't know what is normal. When he was taken back to the magistrate's office another time, his lawyer was unable to be present. The magistrate said Meursault had the reputation of being a self-centered person. Meursault said, "Well, I rarely have anything much to say, so naturally I keep my mouth shut." Then the magistrate asked about the shooting, but Meursault really had no answer. Then he asked why Meursault paused between the first and second shot. And Meursault didn't answer, but he thought back to the red glow of the beach and the feeling of the fiery breath on his cheeks. In other words, the weather made him do it. The sun dominated his power over his actions. And maybe the sun represents humanity and how society suffocates us. And Meursault refused to be held down, so he took action. Then the magistrate took out a silver crucifix from a filing cabinet. Meursault said he didn't believe in God. The magistrate tried to force God on him, but it didn't work, so the magistrate said Meursault had a hardened soul and referred to him as Mr. Antichrist after that. Meursault's atheism is another way he isolates himself from society. He is not restrained by customs, nor traditions, or even by God himself. Meursault is indeed a man going his own way. Eventually, Marie went to visit Meursault. The waiting room was noisy, so they had to talk loudly to be heard. She still believed that he would get released and they would get married, but that was never going to be. Marie is the optimist. She's the romantic in their relationship. How in the world would their marriage be practical, though? Meursault, he is like an empty vessel. He goes where his notions take him. He's not committed to anything or anybody. Marriage to him is the same as committing to seeing a movie. It doesn't matter one way or the other. Now, Marie, on the other hand, she is a real feeling person. She is just the opposite of Meursault. She is not an empty vessel. She is very full of life and emotion and, love and happiness. Meursault is just the opposite. A few months later, Meursault's trial started. He said, "At first, I could hardly believe that all these people had come on my account. It was such a new experience, being a focus of interest. In the ordinary way, no one paid much attention to me. The press was there, and so were his friends. The courtroom was full. He wondered why anybody would bother to notice him, since he hardly noticed himself. But it was a slow news cycle, so that's also the reason the press were there." The judge launched into an account of what Meursault had done. His first question was why Meursault had sent his mother to the home. Meursault said that it was because he didn't have enough money to look after her properly. Then the prosecutor asked why he went back to the stream and if it was his intention to kill the Arab. He said it was pure chance that he went back there. And, it was as if Meursault had no control over his actions, as if he were just somebody floating along, like I said earlier, sleepwalking through life. And that's what Meursault was doing. And this time it got him into trouble. Then the director of the home took the stand. He said he was surprised by Meursault's calmness and that he hadn't wanted to see his mother's body or shed a single tear, and that he had left immediately after the funeral ended. Another thing that surprised the warden was that Meursault didn't know his mother's age. As you can see, this trial is a farce, and I believe that's what the author intended it to be. How does Meursault killing an Arab have anything to do with whether he cried at his mother's funeral or not? What Camus is doing is showing Meursault how inhuman he's been and to confront his own existence. Also, to show Meursault that he doesn't live on an island all by himself. There are other people who notice him and that his actions matter in the whole scheme of things. When the doorkeeper was questioned, he said that Meursault declined to see his mother's body and that he smoked cigarettes and slept and drank coffee. This is when Meursault felt a wave of indignation spreading throughout the courtroom, and for the first time, he felt that he was guilty. So little by little, Meursault is becoming self-aware, and that's what part 2 of the book is really about. See, Meursault feeling a wave of indignation is something that he would not have felt in part 1. Thomas Perez, his mother's boyfriend, said that Meursault didn't weep. Again, what does this have to do with the shooting? When Marie took the stand, the prosecutor asked her when she and Meursault got together. She gave the date. The prosecutor let it be known that this was the day after his mother's funeral. The prosecutor said, "Gentlemen of the jury, I would have you note that on the next day after his mother's funeral, that man was visiting the swimming pool, starting a liaison with a girl, and going to see a comic film. The rest of the witnesses were Mason, Salamano, and Raymond. The prosecutor noted how Raymond beat up a woman and how Meursault covered for him. This, among other things, didn't make Mersault's case look good. The prosecutor summed up Mersault's case from his mother's death onward. He stressed Mersault's heartlessness, his inability to state his mother's age, his visit to the swimming pool where he met Marie, and the comedy film they saw afterwards, and then having sex with her. And also the fact that he had written the letter in collusion with Raymond so as to entice his mistress to his room and subject her to violence. Then, on the beach, he'd provoked a brawl with Raymond's enemies, in the course of which Raymond was wounded. Then Mersault asked for the revolver and gone back to the beach with the intention of using it, and afterwards he shot the Arab. After the first shot, he waited and then made certain the man was dead by firing 4 more shots. Mersault said he shot the guy because of the sun. The prosecutor also said Mersault had no soul, no morality, and was a menace to society. He also recommended that Mersault be executed. Finally, Mersault was charged with murder of malice aforethought, provocation, and extenuating circumstances. He was to be decapitated in public. Now, this is odd because, from what I understand, during that era, this probably would not have happened to a guy like Mersault. In fact, he probably could have paid somebody off and been found not guilty, because Arabs were considered second-class citizens or even lower, during this time. When Mersault went back to his cell, he was visited by the priest. He didn't want to see the priest, but the man insisted. The priest asked why Mersault didn't want to see him, and Mersault said he didn't believe in God. Mersault didn't think it was of any importance whether he believed in God or not. It didn't matter. The priest said, "I can help you." And Mersault said he didn't want to be helped. After several questions, Mersault became irritated by the priest and eventually got angry. He said he pictured the afterlife as a life in which he can remember this life on earth. That's all he wanted. Then something seemed to break within Mersault, and he started yelling at the top of his voice. He hurled insults at the priest. He said not to waste his rotten prayers on him. It was better to burn than to disappear. As you can see again, Mersault is feeling. He feels anger. He feels rage. These emotions are stirring up inside of him, emotions he never knew he had. Then Mersault sums up why he was arrested. He believes it was because he didn't weep at his mother's funeral. He said, "What difference could they make to me? The deaths of others, or a mother's love, or his God, or the way a man decides to live, the fate he thinks he chooses. Every man was privileged. All alike would be condemned to die one day. His turn, too, would come like the others. And what difference could it make if, after being charged with murder, he were executed because he didn't weep at his mother's funeral, since it all came to the same thing in the end?" The book ends with Mersault thinking of his mother. He said, "I laid my heart open to the benign indifference of the universe. All that remained to hope was that on the day of my execution, there should be a huge crowd of spectators, and that they should greet me with howls of hate." This last line in the novel basically sums up Mersault's view of the universe, being that it is indifferent. It doesn't care that we live or die, and that life is meaningless. He himself is indifferent to the world as well. And now, as opposed to earlier in the book, he opens himself up to the benign indifference of the universe. His only companions in this universe will be the vicious mob he wishes to greet him. I think that's amazing because he is finally fully human. It's as if he was a robot at the beginning of the book, and now at the very end, he is fully human. He feels, he knows that he is conscious. He is a living, breathing human being. Thank you. Bye.